The Apache Mountain War by Robert Howard. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Apache Mountain War by Robert Howard. Someday, maybe, when I'm old and gray in the whiskers, I'll have sense enough not to stop when I'm riding by Uncle Shadrach Polk's cabin and Aunt Tascosa Polk hollers at me. Take the last time, for instance. I ought to have spurred Captain Kidd into a high run when she stuck her head out in the winder and yelled, "Breckenridge! Oh, Breckenridge!" But I reckon Pap's right when he says nature give me so much muscle she didn't have no room left for brains. Anyway, I reined Captain Kidd around, ignoring his playful efforts to bite the muscle out of my left thigh, and I rode up to the stoop and taken off my coonskin cap. I said, "Well, Aunt Tascosa, how air you all?" "You may well ask how air we," she said bitterly. "How should a poor weak woman be farin' with a critter like Shadrach for a husband? It's a wonder I got a roof over my head or so much as a barrel of b'ar meat put up for the winter. The place is going to rack and ruin. Look at that there busted axe handle, for instance. Is a poor weak female like me got to endure such abuse?" "You don't mean to tell me Uncle Shadrach's been beating you with that axe handle?" I says, scandalized. "No," says this poor weak female. "I busted it over his head a week ago, and he's refused to mend it. It's liquor has been Shadrach's ruin. When he's sober he's a passable figure of a man, as men go. But swiggin' blue ruin has brung him to shame and degradation." "He looks fat and sassy," I says. "Beauty ain't only skin deep," she scowls. "Shadrach's like Dead Sea fruit, fair and fat-bellied to look on, but ready to dissolve in dust and whiskey fumes when prodded. Do you know where he is right now?" And she glared at me so accusingly that Captain Kidd recoiled and turned pale. "No," I says. "Whar?" "He's over at the Apache Mountain settlement a-lappin' up liquor," she snarled. "Just a-rootin' and a-wallerin' in sin and corn juice, riskin' his immortal soul and blowin' in the money he got off'n his coon hides. I had him locked in the corn crib, aimin' to plead with him and appeal to his better nature. But whilst I was out behind the corral cuttin' me a hickory club to do the appealin' with, he kicked the door loose and skun out. I know whar he's headin', to Joel Garfield's still house, which is a 'bomination in the sight of the Lord and ought to be burnt to the ground and the ashes squenched with the blood of the wicked. But I can't stand here listening to your gab. I got hominy to make. What you been wasting my time like this for? I got a good mind to tell your pap on you. You light a shuck for Apache Mountain and bring Shadrach home." "But," I said. "Don't you give me no arguments, you impertinent scoundrel," she hollered. "I should think you'd be glad to help a poor weak female critter, 'stead o' wasting your time gambling and fighting in such dens of iniquity as war paint. I want you to fix some way so's to disgust Shadrach with drink for the rest of his natural life, and if you don't, you'll hear from me, you good-for-nothing—" "All right," I yelled. "All right. Anything for a little peace. I'll get him and bring him home and make a teetotaler out of him if I have to strangle the old son of a—" "How dast you use such language in front of me?" she hollered. "Ain't you got no respect for a lady? I'll be expletive blanked if I know what the expletive-deleted world's coming to. Get out of here and don't show your homely mug around here again unless you got Shadrach off a rum for good." Well, if Uncle Shadrach ever took a swig of rum in his life, it was 'cause they weren't no good red corn whiskey within reach. But I didn't try to argue with Aunt Tiscosa. I lit out down the trail, feeling like I'd been tied up to an Apache stake with a whole tribe sticking red-hot Spanish daggers into my hide. Aunt Tiscosa affects a man that way. I heard Captain Kidd heave a sigh of relief plumb up from his belly, too, as we crossed a ridge, and her distant voice was drowned out by the soothing sounds of a couple of bobcats fighting with a timber wolf. I thought, what calm and happy lives them simple critters lived without no Aunt Tiscosa. I rode on, forgetting my own troubles and feeling sorry for poor Uncle Shadrach. They weren't a mean bone in his carcass. He was just as good-natured and hearty a critter as you'd ever meet, even in the Humboldts. But his main objective in life seemed to be to stow away all the corn juice they is in the world. As I rode along, I racked my brain for a plan to break Uncle Shadrach of this here habit. I like a dram myself, but in moderation, never more'n a gallon or so at a time, unless it's a special occasion. I don't believe in a man making a hog out of hisself, and anyway, I was sick and tired running Uncle Shadrach down and fetching him home from his sprees. I thought so much about it on my way to Apache Mountain that I got so sleepy I seen I was getting into no state to ride Captain Kidd. He got to looking back at me now and then, and I knowed if he seen me dozing in the saddle, he'd try his darndest to break my neck. I was passing Cousin Bill Gordon's barn about that time, so I thought I'd go in and take me a nap up in the hayloft, and maybe I'd dream about a way to make a water drinker out of Uncle Shadrach, or something. I tied Captain Kidd and started into the barn, and what should I see but Bill's 3 youngest boys engaged in daubing paint on Uncle Jeopard Grimes' favorite jackass, Joshua. "What are you all doing to Joshua?" I demanded, and they jumped back and looked guilty. Joshua was a critter which Uncle Jeopard used for a pack mule when he went prospecting. He got the urge maybe every 3 or 4 year, and between times Joshua just ate and slept. He was the sleepinest jackass I ever seen. He was snoozing now, whilst them young idiots was working on him. I seen what they was at. Bill had loaned a feller some money which had a stored down to war paint, and the feller went broke and give Bill a lot of stuff out of the store for pay. They was a lot of paint amongst it. Bill packed it home, though I don't know what he aimed to do with it, because all the houses in the Humboldts was log cabins which nobody ever painted, or if they did, they just whitewashed 'em. But anyway, he had it all stored in his barn, and his boys was smearing it on Joshua. He was the darndest sight you ever seen. They'd painted a big stripe down his spine like a Spanish Mustang, only this stripe was green instead of black, and more stripes curving over his ribs and down under his belly, red, white, and blue, and they'd painted his ears green. "What you all mean by sech doin's?" I asked. "Uncle Jeopard'll plumb skin you all alive. He sets a lot of store by that there Jack." "Aw, it's just funnin'," they said. "You won't know who done it." "You go scrub that paint off," I ordered 'em. "Joshua'll lick it off and get pisoned." "It won't hurt him," they assured me. "He got in here yesterday and et 3 cans of paint and a bucket of whitewash. That's what give us the idee. He can eat anything. Eatin'est Jack you ever seen." "Hee hee hee," snickered one of 'em. "He looks like a drunkard's dream." Instantly an idea hit me. "Gimme that jackass," I exclaimed. He's just what I need to cure Uncle Shadrach Polk of drinking liquor. One glimpse of that there Jack in his present state, and Uncle Shadrach'll think he's got the delirious tremens, and get so scared he'll swear off whiskey for life. If you aims to lead Joshua to Joel's stillhouse, they said, you'll be all day getting there. You can't hustle Joshua. I ain't gonna lead him, I said. You all hitch a couple of mules to your pa's spring wagon. I'll leave Captain Kidd here till I get back. We'll put him in the corral behind the barn, they says. Them poles are set 4 foot deep in concrete, and the fence is braced with railroad iron. So maybe it'll hold him till you get back, if you ain't gone too long. When they got the mules hitched, I tied Joshua's legs and laid him in the wagon bed, where he went to sleep, and I climbed onto the seat and lit out for Apache Mountain. I hadn't gone far when I run over a rock and woke Joshua up, and he started braying and kept it up till I stopped and give him a ear of corn to chew on. As I started off, I seen Dick Grimes' youngest gal peeping at me from the bresh, and when I called to her, she run off. I hoped she hadn't heard Joshua braying. I knowed she couldn't see him, laying down in the wagon bed, but he had a very peculiar bray, and anybody in the Humboldts could recognize him by it. I hoped she didn't know I had Joshua, 'cause she was the derndest tattletale in the Bear Creek country, and Uncle Jeppard is such a cross-grained old cuss you can't explain nothing to him. He was born with the notion that the whole world was plotting agin him. It hadn't been much more'n good daylight when I rode past Uncle Shadrach's house, and I'd pushed Captain Kidd pretty brisk from there. The mules made good time, so it warn't noon yet when I come to Apache Mountain. As I approached the settlement, which was a number of cabins strung up and down a brushy run, I swung wide of the wagon road and took to the trails, because I didn't want nobody to see me with Joshua. It was kind of tough going because the trails was mostly footpaths and not wide enough for the wagon, and I had to stop and pull up saplings every few yards. I was scared the noise would wake up Joshua and he'd start braying again, but that jackass could sleep through a bombardment long as he weren't being jolted personal. I was pretty close to the settlement when I had to get out of the wagon and go ahead and break down some brush so the wheels wouldn't foul, and when I laid hold of it, a couple of figures jumped up on the other side. One was Cousin Buckner Kirby's gal, Kit, and t'other was young Harry Braxton from the other side of the mountain, and no kin to none of us. "Oh," says Kit, kind of breathless. "What you all doing out here?" I scowled, fixing Harry with an eye which made him shiver and fuss with his gun belt. "Are your intentions, Honorable Braxton?" "I don't know what business it is of yourn," said Kit bitterly. "I makes it mine," I assured her. "If this young buck can't come sparking you at a respectable place an hour, why I figures—" "Your remarks is ignorant and insultin'," says Harry, sweating profusely, but game. "I aims to make this here young lady my wife, if it weren't for the toughest prospective father-in-law ever blighted young love's sweet dream with a number 12 boot in the seat of the pants. To put it in words of one syllable, so's even you can understand, Breckenridge," says Kit, "Harry wants to marry me, but Pap is too derned mean and stubborn to let us. He don't like the Braxtons, 'count of one of 'em skun him on a hoss swap 30 years ago." "I don't love 'em myself," I grunted. "But go on." "Well," she says, "after Pap had kicked Harry out of the house 5 or 6 times, and dusted his britches with birdshot on another occasion, we kind of got the idee he was prejudiced agin Harry. So we has to take this here method of seeing each other. "Why don't you all run off and get married anyway?" I asked. Kit shivered. "We wouldn't dare try it. Pap might wake up and catch us, and he'd shoot Harry. I'd taken a big chance sneaking out here today. Ma and all the kids are all over visiting a few days with Aunt Washita, but Pap wouldn't let me go for fear I'd meet Harry over there. I snuck out here for a few minutes. Pap thinks I'm gathering greens for dinner, but if I don't hustle back, he'll come looking for me with a hickory gad." "Aw, shucks," I said. "You all gotta use your brains like I do. You leave it to me. I'll get your old man out of the way for the night and give you a chance to skip." "How'll you do that?" Kit asked skeptically. "Never mind," I told her, not having the slightest idea how I was going to do it. "I'll tend to that. You get your things ready, and you, Harry, you come along the road in a buckboard just about moonrise, and Kit'll be waiting for you. You all can get hitched over to Warpaint. Buckner won't do nothing after you're hitched." "Will you, sure enough?" says Harry, brightening up. "Sure I will," I assured him. "Vamoose now, and get that buckboard." He hustled off, and I said to Kit, "Get in the wagon and ride to the settlement with me. This time tomorrow you'll be a happy married woman, sure enough." "I hope so," she said, sad-like. "But I'm betting something'll go wrong and Pap'll catch us, and I'll eat my meals off the mantel board for the next week." "Trust me," I assured her as I helped her in the wagon. She didn't seem much surprised when she looked down in the bed and seen Joshua all tied up and painted and snoring his head off. Humboldt folks expects me to do unusual things. "You needn't look like you thought I was crazy," I says irritably. "That critter is for Uncle Shadrach Polk." "If Uncle Shadrach sees that thing," says she, "he'll think he's seeing worse'n snakes." "That's what I aim for him to think," I says. "Who's he staying with?" "Us," says she. I says. "That there complicates things a little. Where at does he sleep?" "Upstairs," she says. "Well," I says, "he won't interfere with our elopement none. You get out of here and go on home, and don't let your pap suspect nothing." "I'd be likely to, wouldn't I?" says she, and clumb down and pulled out. I'd stopped in a thicket at the edge of the settlement, and I could see the roof of Cousin Buckner's house from where I was. I could also hear Cousin Buckner bellering, "Kit, Kit, where air you? I know you ain't in the garden. If I have to come hunting you, I 'low I'll all keep your britches on," I heard Kit call. "I'm a comin'." I heard Cousin Buckner subside into grumblings and rumblings like a grizzly talking to himself. I figured he was out on the road which run past his house, but I couldn't see him, and neither he couldn't see me, nor nobody could which might happen to be passing along the road. I unhitched the mules and tied 'em where they could graze and get water, and I hoisted Joshua out of the wagon, and taken the ropes off of his legs and tied him to a tree and fed him and the mules with some corn I'd brung from Cousin Bill Gordon's. Then I went through the bresh till I come to Joel Garfield's still house, which was maybe half a mile from there up the run. I didn't meet nobody. Joel was by hisself in the still house, for a wonder, but he was making up for lack of trade by his own personal attention to his stock. "Ain't Uncle Shadrach Polk nowhere around?" I asked, and Joel lowered a jug of white corn long enough to answer me. "Naw," he says, "he ain't right now. He's likely still sleeping off the souse he was on last night." "He didn't leave here till after midnight," says Joel, with another pull at the jug. "And he was taking all sides of the road at onct. He'll pull in about the middle of the afternoon and start in to fill in his hide so full he can just barely stagger back to Buckner Kirby's house by midnight or past. I bet he has a fine old time navigating them stairs Buckner's got into his house. I'd be afeared to tackle 'em myself.
even when I was sober. A pole ladder's all I want to get into a loft with, but Buckner always did have highfalutin ideas. Lately he's been arguing with Uncle Shadrach to cut down on his drinking, especially when he's full hisself. Speaking of Cousin Buckner, I says, has he been around for his regular dram yet? Not yet, says Joel. He'll be in right after dinner, as usual. He wouldn't if he knowed what I knowed, I opined, because I'd thought up a way to get Cousin Buckner out of the way that night. He'd be heading for Wolf Canyon fast as he could spraddle. I'd just met Harry Braxton with a pack mule heading for there. You don't mean somebody's made a strike in Wolf Canyon? Says Joel, pricking up his ears. You never heard nothing like it, I assured him. Alder Gulch weren't nothing to this. Says Joel, absent-mindedly pouring himself a quart-sized tin cup full of corn juice. I'm an Injun if it ain't, I says, and drinking me a dram and went back to lay in the bresh and watch the Kirby house. I was well pleased with myself, 'cause I knowed what a wolf Cousin Buckner was after gold. If anything could draw him away from home and his daughter, it'd be news of a big strike. I was willing to bet my 6-shooters against a prickly pear that as soon as Joel told him the news, he'd light out for Wolf Canyon, more especially as he'd think Harry Braxton was going there too, and no chance of him sneaking off with Kit whilst the old man was gone. After a while, I seen Cousin Buckner leave the house and go down the road toward the still house, and pretty soon Uncle Shadrach emerged and headed the same way. Pretty well satisfied with myself, I went back to where I left Cousin Bill's wagon, fried me 5 or 6 pounds of venison I'd brung along for provisions and ate it, and drunk at the creek, then laid down and slept for a few hours. It was right at sundown when I woke up. I went on foot through the bresh till I came out behind Buckner's cow pen and seen Kit milking. I asked her if anybody was in the house. "Nobody but me," she said, "and I'm out here. I ain't seen neither Pap nor Uncle Shadrach since they left right after dinner. Can it be your scheme is actually working out?" "Certainly," I says. "Uncle Shadrach'll be swilling at Joel's still house till past midnight, and your Pap is undoubtedly on his way toward Wolf Canyon. You get through with your chores and get ready to skip. Don't have no light in your room, though. It's just likely your Pap told off one of his relatives to lay in the bresh and watch the house, him being of a suspicious nature. We don't want to have no bloodshed. When I hear Harry's buckboard, I'll come for you. And if you hear any peculiar noises before he gets here, don't think nothing of it. It'll just be me lugging Joshua upstairs." "That critter'll bray fit to wake the dead," says she. "He won't neither," I said. "He'll go to sleep and keep his mouth shet. Uncle Shadrach won't suspect nothing till he lights him a candle to go to bed by. Or if he's too drunk to light a candle and just falls down on the bed in the dark, he'll wake up during the night sometime to get him a drink of water. He's bound to see Joshua sometime between midnight and morning. All I hope is the shock won't prove fatal. You go get ready to skip now." I went back to the wagon and cooked me some more venison, also about a dozen eggs Kit had give me along with some corn pone and a gallon of buttermilk. I managed to make a light snack out of them morsels, and then, as soon as it was good and dark, I hitched up the mules and loaded Joshua into the wagon and went slow and easy down the road. I stopped behind the corral and tied the mules. The house was dark and still. I toted Joshua into the house and carried him upstairs. I heard Kit moving around in her room, but they weren't nobody else in the house. Cousin Buckner had regular stairs in his house like what they have in big towns, like war paint and the like. Most folks in the Bear Creek country just has a ladder going up through a trap door, and some said they would be a jedgment on to Buckner, account of him indulging in such vain and sinful luxury. But I got to admit that packing a jackass up a flight of stairs was a lot easier than what it would have been to lug him up a ladder. Joshua didn't bray nor kick none. He didn't care what was happening to him so long as he didn't have to do no work personal. I unfastened his legs and tied a rope around his neck and t'other end to the foot of Uncle Shadrach's bunk, and give him a hat I found on a peg to chew on till he went to sleep, which I knowed he'd do pronto. I then went downstairs and heard Kit fussing around in her room, but it warn't time for Harry, so I went back out behind the corral and sot down and leaned my back agin the fence, and I reckon I must have gone to sleep. Just associating with Joshua give a man the habit. First thing I knowed, I heard a buckboard rumbling over a bridge up the draw, and knowed it was Harry comin' in fear and trembling to claim his bride. The moon warn't up yet, but they was a glow above the trees on the eastern ridges. I jumped up and ran quick and easy to Kit's winder. I can move light as a cougar in spite of my size. And I said, "Kit, air you ready?" "I'm ready," she whispered, all of a tremble. "Don't talk so loud." "They ain't nothing to be scared of," I soothed her, but lowered my voice just to humor her. "Your pap is in Wolf Canyon by this time. Ain't nobody in the house but us. I've been watching out by the corral." Kit sniffed. "Weren't that you I heard come into the house while ago?" she asked. "You been dreaming," I said. "Come on, that's Harry's buckboard coming up the road." "Let me get just a few more things together," she whispered, fumbling around in the dark. That's just like a woman. No matter how much time they has aforehand, they always has something to do at the last minute. I waited by the winder, and Harry druv on past the house a few rods and tied the hoss and come back, walking light and soft and plenty pale in the starlight. "Go on out the front door and meet him," I told her. "No, wait." Because all to onct Harry had ducked back out of the road, and he jumped over the fence and come to the winder where I was. He was shaking like a leaf. "Somebody's coming up the road afoot," he says. "It's Pap," gasped Kit. Her and Harry was sure scared of the old man. They hadn't said a word above a whisper you could never have heard 3 yards away, and I was kind of suiting my voice to theirn. "Aw, it can't be," I said. "He's in Wolf Canyon. That's Uncle Shadrach coming home to sleep off his drunk, but he's back a lot earlier than what I figured he would be. He ain't important, but we don't want no delay. Here, Kit, give me that bag. Now let me lift you out of the winder. So. Now you all skin out. I'm going to climb this here tree where I can see the fun. Now get." They crope out the side gate of the yard, just as Uncle Shadrach come in at the front gate, and he never seen 'em, because the house was between 'em. They went so soft and easy, I thought if Cousin Buckner had been in the house, he wouldn't have woke up. They was hustling down the road toward the buckboard, as Uncle Shadrach was coming up on the porch and going into the hall. I could hear him climbing the stair. I could have seen him if there'd been a light in the house, because I could look into a winder in his room and one in the downstairs hall, too, from the tree where I was setting. He got into his room about the time the young folks reached their buckboard, and I seen a light flare up as he struck a match. They weren't no hall upstairs. The stairs run right up to the door of his room. He stood in the doorway and lit a candle on a shelf by the door. I could see Joshua standing by the bunk with his head down, asleep, and I reckon the light must have woke him up, 'cause he throwed up his head and give a loud and ringing bray. Uncle Shadrach turned and seen Joshua, and he let out a shriek and fell backwards downstairs. The candlelight streamed down into the hall, and I got the shock of my life, because as Uncle Shadrach went pitching down them steps, yelling bloody murder, they sounded a bull's roar below, and out of the room at the foot of the stair came prancing a huge figure waving a shotgun in one hand and pulling on his breeches with the other. It was Cousin Buckner, which I thought was safe in Wolf Canyon. That had been him which Kit heard come in and go to bed a while before. "What's going on here?" he roared. "What you doing, Shadrach?" "Get out of my way!" screamed Uncle Shadrach. "I just seen the devil in the form of a zebra jackass. Let me out of here!" He busted out of the house and jumped the fence and went up the road like a quarter hoss, and Cousin Buckner ran out behind him. The moon was just coming up, and Kit and Harry was just starting down the road. When she seen her old man erupt from the house, Kit screeched like a scared catamount, and Buckner heard her. He whirled and seen the buckboard rattling down the road, and he knowed what was happening. He give a beller and let bam at 'em with his shotgun, but it was too long a range. "Where's my hoss?" he roared, and started for the corral. I knowed if he got straddle of that dern long-legged bay gelding of his, he'd ride them poor infants down before they went 10 miles. I jumped down out of the tree and yelled, "Hey there, Cousin Buckner! Hey, Buck!" He whirled and shot the tail off of my coonskin cap before he seen who it was. "What you mean, jumping down on me like that?" he roared. "What you doing up that tree? Where you come from?" "Never mind that," I said. "You want to catch Harry Braxton before he gets away with your gal, don't you? Don't stop to saddle a hoss. I got a light wagon hitched up behind the corral. We can run 'em down easy in that." "Let's go!" he roared, and in no time at all we was off, him standing up in the bed and cussing and waving his shotgun. "I'll have his sculp!" he roared. "I'll pickle his heart and feed it to my hound dogs. Can't you go no faster?" Them dern mules was a lot faster than I'd thought. I didn't dare hold 'em back for fear Buckner'd get suspicious, and the first thing I knowed we was overhauling the buckboard foot by foot. Harry's critters weren't much account, and Cousin Bill Gordon's mules was laying their bellies to the ground. I don't know what Kit thought when she looked back and seen us tearing after 'em, but Harry must have thought I was betraying 'em. Otherwise he wouldn't have opened up on me with his 6-shooter. But all he done was knock some splinters out of the wagon and nick my shoulder. The old man would have returned the fire with his shotgun, but he was scared he might hit Kit, and both vehicles was bounding and bouncing along too fast and furious for careful aiming. All to onct we come to a place where the road forked, and Kit and Harry taken the right-hand turn. I'd taken the left. "Are you crazy, you blame fool?" roared Cousin Buckner. "Turn back and take the other road." "I can't," I responded. "These mules is running away." "You're a liar!" howled Cousin Buckner. "Quit pouring leather onto them mules, you blasted expletive, and turn back! Turn back, cuss you!" With that he started hammering me in the head with the stock of his shotgun. We was thundering along a road which run along the rim of a sloping bluff, and when Buckner's shotgun went off accidentally, the mules really did get scared and started running away, just about the time I reached back to take the shotgun away from Cousin Buckner. Being beat in the head with the butt was getting awful monotonous, 'cause he'd been doing nothing else for the past half mile. I yanked the gun out of his hand, and just then the left hind wheel hit a stump, and the hind end of the wagon went straight up in the air, and the pole splintered. The mules run right out of the harness, and me and the wagon and Cousin Buckner went over the bluff and down the slope in a whirling tangle of wheels and legs and heads and profanity. We brung up against a tree at the bottom, and I throwed the ruins off of me and riz, swearing fervently when I saw how much money I'd have to pay Cousin Bill Gordon for his wagon. But Cousin Buckner give me no time for meditation. He'd untangled hisself from a hind wheel, and was doing a war dance in the moonlight and frothing at the mouth. "You done that on purpose!" he raged. "You never aimed to catch them wretches! You taken the wrong road on purpose! You turned us over on purpose! Now I'll never catch the scoundrel which run away with my dadder! The poor, dumb, trustin', expletive innercent!" "Be calm, Cousin Buckner," I advised. "He'll make her a good husband. They're well onto their way to war paint and a happy married life. Best thing you can do is forgive 'em and give 'em your blessing." "Well," he snarled, "you ain't neither my daughter or my son-in-law. Here's my blessing to you." It was a poor return for all the trouble I'd taken, for him to push me into a cactus bed and hit me with a rock the size of a watermelon. However, I'd taken into consideration that he was overwrought and not himself, so I ignored his incivility and made no retort whatever outside of splintering a wagon spoke over his head. I then clomb the bluff, making no reply to his impassioned and profane comments, and looked around for the mules. They hadn't run far. I seen 'em grazing down the road, and I started after 'em, when I heard horses galloping back up the road toward the settlement, and around a turn in the road come Uncle Jepperd Grimes, with his whiskers streaming in the moonlight, and 9 or 10 of his boys riding hard behind him. "There he is!" he howled, impulsively discharging his 6-shooter at me. "There's the fiend in human form! There's the kidnapper of helpless Jassix! Boys, do your duty!" They pulled up around me and started piling off their horses with blood in their eyes and weapons in their hands. "Hold on," I says. "If it's Joshua you fools are after—" "He admits the crime!" howled Uncle Jepperd. "Is it Joshua, says you? You know darn well it is! We've been combing the hills for you ever since my granddaughter brought me the news. What you done with him, you scoundrel?" "Aw," I said, "he's all right. I was just going to—" "He evades the question!" screamed Uncle Jepperd. "Get him, boys!" "I tell you he's all right," I roared, but they give me no chance to explain. Them Grimeses is all alike. You can't tell 'em nothing. You gotta knock it into their fool heads. They descended on me with fence rails and rocks and wagon spokes and loaded quirks and gun stocks in a way which would have tried the patience of a saint. I always try to be as patient with my errand relatives as I can be. I merely taken their weapons away from 'em and kind of pushed 'em back away from me. And if they'd look where they fell, Jim and Joe and Erath wouldn't have fell down off that bluff and broke their arms and legs. And Bill wouldn't have fractured his skull agin that tree. I handled 'em as easy as babies and kept my temper in spite of Uncle Jepperd dancing around on his hoss and yelling, "Lay into him, boys! Don't be scared of the big grizzly! He can't hurt us!" and shooting at me every time he thought he could shoot without hitting one of his own offspring. He did puncture 2 or 3 of 'em and then blamed me for it, the old jackass. Nobody could have acted with more restraint than I did when Dick Grimes broke the blade of his bowie knife off on my hip bone, and the 7 fractured ribs I give his brother Jacob was a mild retaliation for chawing my ear like he done. But it was an ill-advised impulse which prompted Esau Grimes to stab me in the seat of the britches with a pitchfork. There ain't nothing which sours the milk of human kindness in a man's veins any more than getting pitchforked by a raging relative behind his back. I give a beller which shook the acorns out of the oaks, all up and down the run, and whirled on Esau so quick it jerked the pitchfork out of his hands and left it sticking in my hide. I reached back and pulled it out, and wrapped the handle around Esau's neck. Then I'd taken him by the ankles and started remodeling the landscape with him. I mowed down a sapling thicket with him, and leveled a cactus bed with him, and swept the road with him, and when his brothers tried to rescue him, I beat 'em over the head with him till they was too groggy to do anything but run in circles. Uncle Jepperd came spurring at me, trying to knock me down with his hoss and trample me, and Esau was so limp by this time he weren't much good for a club no more, so I whirled him round my head a few times and throwed him at Uncle Jepperd. Him and Uncle Jepperd and the hoss all went down in a heap together, and from the way Uncle Jepperd hollered you'd have thought somebody was trying to injure him. It was plumb disgusting. 5 or 6 of his boys recovered enough to surge onto me then, and I knocked them all down on top of him and Esau and the hoss, and the hoss was trying to get up and kicking around right and left, and his hoofs was going bam, bam, bam on human heads, and Uncle Jepperd was hollering so loud I got to thinking maybe he was hurt or something. So I reached down in the heap and got him by the whiskers and pulled him out from under the hoss and 4 or 5 of his fool boys. "Are you hurt, Uncle Jepperd?" I inquired. "Expletive deleted," responded Uncle Jepperd, rewarding my solicitude by trying to stab me with his bowie knife. This ingratitude irritated me, and I tossed him from me fretfully, and as he was pulling himself out of the prickly pear bed where he landed, he suddenly give a louder scream than ever. Something come ambling up the road, and I seen it was that fool jackass Joshua, which had evidently ate his rope and left the house looking for more grub. He looked like a 4-legged nightmare in the moonlight, but all Uncle Jepperd noticed was the red paint on him. "Help! Murder!" howled Uncle Jepperd. "They've wounded him mortally. He's bleeding to death. Get a tourniquet, quick!" With that they all deserted the fray, them which was able to hobble, and run to grab Joshua to staunch his bleeding. But when he seen all them Grimeses coming for him, Joshua got scared and took out through the bresh. They all pelted after him, and the last thing I heard as they passed out of hearing was Uncle Jepperd wailing, "Joshua, stop, durn it! This here's your friends. Pull up, dang ye! We wants to help you, you cussed fool!" I turned to see what I could do for the casualties which lay groaning in the road and at the foot of the bluff, but they said unanimous they didn't want no help from a enemy, which they meant me. They one and all promised to pickle my heart and eat it as soon as they was able to get about on crutches. So I abandoned my efforts and headed for the settlement. The fighting had scared the mules up the road a ways, but I catched 'em and made a hackamore out of one of my galluses, and rode one and led t'other, and lit out straight through the bresh for Bear Creek. I'd had a belly full of Apache Mountain, but I swung past Joel's still house to find out how come Cousin Buckner
Didn't go to Wolf Canyon.
When I got there, the still house was dark and the door was shut, and they was a note on the door. I could read a little by then, and I spelt it out. It said, "Gone to Wolf Canyon. Joel Garfield." That selfish polecat hadn't told Cousin Buckner nor nobody about the strike. He'd got hisself a pack mule and lit out for Wolf Canyon hisself. A hell of a relative he was, maybe doing poor Cousin Buckner out of a fortune for all he knowed. A mile from the settlement I met Jack Gordon coming from a dance on t'other side of the mountain, and he said he'd seen Uncle Shadrach Polk fogging down the trail on a mule he was riding bareback without no bridle. So I thought, well, anyway, my scheme for scaring him out of a taste of liquor worked. Jack said Uncle Shadrach looked like he'd seen a herd of haints. It was about daylight when I stopped at Bill Gordon's ranch to leave him his mules. I paid him for his wagon, and also for the damage Captain Kidd had did to his corral. Bill had to build a new one, and Captain Kidd had also run his prize stallion off of the ranch, and chawed the ears off a longhorn bull, and busted into the barn and gobbled up about $10 worth of oats. When I lit out for Bear Creek again, I warn't feeling in no benevolent mood. But, thinks I, it's worth it if it's made a water swigger out of Uncle Shadrach. It was well along toward noon when I pulled up at the door and called for Aunt Tascosa. Judge my scandalized amazement when I was greeted by a deluge of biling water from the winder, and Aunt Tascosa stuck her head out and says, "You buzzard in the form of a human being! How you got the brass to come bugling around here? If I weren't a lady, I'd tell you just what I thought of you, you expletive blanked! Git before I opens up on you with this here shotgun." "Why, Aunt Tascosa, what you talking about?" I asked, combing the hot water out of my hair with my fingers. "You got the nerve to ask," she sneered. "Didn't you promise me you'd cure Shadrach a drinking rum? Didn't you, huh? Well, come in here and look at him. He arrived home about daylight on one of Buckner Kirby's mules, and it about ready to drop, and he's been wrastling ever since with a jug he had hid. I can't get no sense out of him." I went in, and Uncle Shadrach was sitting by the back door, and he had hold of that there jug like a drowning man clutching a straw stack. "I'm surprised at you, Uncle Shadrach," I said. "What in the—" "Shut the door, Breckenridge," he says. "They is more devils onto the earth than is dreamed of in our philosophy. I've had a narrer escape, Breckenridge. I let myself be beguiled by the arguments of Buckner Kirby, a son of Belial which is without understanding. He's been wrastling with me to give up liquor. Well, yesterday I got so tired of his arguments, I said I'd try it a while, just to have some peace. I'd never taken a drink all day yesterday, and Breckenridge, I give you my word, when I started to go to bed last night, I seen a red, white, and blue jackass with green ears standing at the foot of my bunk, just as plain as I sees you now. It were the water that done it, Breckenridge," he says, curling his fist lovingly around the handle of the jug. "Water's a snare and a delusion. I drunk water all day yesterday, and look what it done to me. I don't never want to see no water no more again." "Well," I says, losing all patience, "you're a-going to, by golly, if I can heave you from here to that hoss trough in the backyard." I done it. And that's how come the rumor got started that I tried to drown Uncle Shadrach Polk in a hoss trough because he refused to swear off liquor. Aunt Tascosa was responsible for that there slander, which was a poor way to repay me for all I did for her. But people ain't got no gratitude. End of the Apache Mountain War.